The year is 1996, and Jean-Claude Van Damme, already known as one of the biggest martial arts action stars in Hollywood, steps into a project that is not just another fight movie, but a global journey of survival, honor, and identity. With a modest budget compared to blockbuster standards but a highly ambitious vision, the quest brings together fighters from different cultures, deadly competition, and a hidden tournament that only the strongest warriors in the world are invited to. Directed by Van Damme himself, this film blends old-school martial arts energy with an adventure-driven story that feels like a mix of bloodsport and classic globe-trotting treasure hunt films. The story begins in the rough streets of New York City during the early 1920s era setting, where we meet Christopher Dubois, a young orphan struggling to survive. Life has never been kind to him. He lives by stealing, running from gangs, and doing whatever it takes to stay alive. But unlike other street kids, Christopher is clever, fast, and highly adaptable. He knows how to read people, how to escape danger, and most importantly, how to fight when necessary. However, his fighting is not trained. It is pure instinct, shaped by survival rather than discipline. Christopher is not alone in this dangerous world. He is part of a small group of street kids who survive together. But even among them, life is unstable. Every day brings new threats, from local criminals to corrupt authorities who don't care about children like them. Christopher dreams of something beyond this life, even if he cannot fully understand what it is. Deep inside, there is a desire for purpose, a life where he is not just surviving but living with meaning. One day, after a failed theft attempt goes wrong, Christopher finds himself in serious trouble with dangerous criminals. This moment becomes a turning point in his life. While trying to escape, he accidentally crosses paths with a mysterious and wealthy man named Lord Edgar Dobbs. Unlike the harsh world Christopher knows, Dobbs represents power, wealth, and control. But more importantly, he sees something special in Christopher: raw fighting talent and unmatched survival instincts. Instead of punishing him or handing him over to the authorities, Dobbs makes a surprising decision. He offers Christopher a chance to leave his old life behind. But this is not charity, it is an opportunity wrapped in mystery. Dobbs proposes that Christopher travel with him and learn discipline, etiquette, and combat skills. At first, Christopher refuses. He does not trust wealthy men or promises of a better life. But circumstances leave him with no real choice, and slowly he begins to step into a world he has never seen before. As Christopher is taken away from the streets, he experiences a completely different lifestyle. Clean clothes, structured training, strict discipline, everything feels unnatural to him. He struggles with rules, manners, and formal behavior. His instincts are still wild, and he often clashes with authority figures. However, Dobbs is patient. He believes Christopher is not just a street fighter, but someone who could become something far greater if properly shaped. During this phase of training, Christopher begins learning basic combat techniques. He is introduced to controlled fighting styles, breathing discipline, and respect for opponents. This is where his transformation starts. The film slowly shows the contrast between chaos and discipline, his past life versus his possible future. But Christopher is still not fully committed. He questions everything, especially Dobbs' true intentions. Why would a powerful man invest so much in a street orphan? The mystery deepens when Christopher overhears conversations about a secret martial arts competition known only as Gang Gang. It is not just a tournament, It is a gathering of the best fighters from around the world, each representing different nations and fighting traditions. The prize is not just money or fame, it is honor, survival, and the title of Ultimate Champion. But entry is extremely secretive, and only selected individuals are allowed to participate. Christopher slowly realizes that his training is not just for personal growth, it is preparation for something much bigger and more dangerous. Still, he does not fully understand the scale of what lies ahead. His life is about to change forever, but at this moment he is still caught between two worlds: the street survivor he used to be and the disciplined fighter he is becoming. The journey is only beginning, and as Christopher steps further into this hidden world, he will soon discover that the tournament is not just about fighting, it is about strategy, deception, and survival against the world's deadliest warriors. But before he can reach that stage, he must first prove that he is worthy of even entering the path of the quest. Christopher Dubois has now entered a completely new phase of his life. After escaping the harsh streets of New York, he finds himself in a structured environment under the guidance of Lord Edgar Dobbs. But this transition is far from easy. Christopher still carries the mindset of survival, where trust is almost non existent. Every instruction feels suspicious to him, and every rule seems like a potential trap. The training becomes more intense day by day. Christopher is not only being taught how to fight, but also how to behave like a disciplined warrior. He is trained in etiquette, self-control, breathing techniques, and structured combat styles. However, his street instincts constantly clash with this discipline. He breaks rules, challenges authority, and often falls back into his raw, unpredictable fighting style. Dobbs, however, remains patient. He does not try to break Christopher's spirit. Instead, he shapes it slowly. He understands that Christopher is not an ordinary trainee. He is someone with raw potential that needs time and experience to mature. Dobbs uses a mix of pressure, silence, and guidance to slowly bring out Christopher's hidden discipline. During this phase, Christopher is introduced to other elite fighters from around the world. Each of them has a unique fighting background and style. Some are highly disciplined martial artists, others are brutal street fighters, and a few are silent but extremely dangerous assassins. Christopher quickly realizes that he is no longer in a simple training camp. He is surrounded by the best fighters on the planet. Slowly, the truth begins to unfold. All these fighters are being prepared for something much bigger than training. They are all headed toward a secret destination where a hidden martial arts tournament known as Gang will take place. This is not an ordinary competition. It is an elite underground event where only selected fighters from across the world are invited. Christopher is shocked by this revelation. He never imagined that his life would shift from street survival to a global underground fighting tournament. Now he begins to question everything. Is Dobbs truly helping him, or is he simply being used as part of a larger, dangerous plan? At this point, there is no turning back. Christopher is already part of the journey. The fighters are transported on a massive ship traveling across the ocean toward an unknown destination. The ship is not just transportation, it becomes a floating arena of tension, observation, and silent psychological warfare. Fighters study each other carefully, analyzing strengths, weaknesses, and possible threats. Christopher starts to realize something important. Physical strength alone is not enough. The real battle is mental. Strategy, patience, and awareness are just as important as fighting skills. Every fighter on the ship is preparing not just physically, but mentally for what lies ahead. The atmosphere becomes increasingly tense as rivalries begin to form. Some fighters openly show confidence and aggression, while others remain calm and mysterious. Everyone understands one thing clearly: only the strongest and smartest will survive what comes next. During the journey, Christopher continues to evolve. He is no longer just a street survivor, but he is also not yet a fully trained warrior. He is in between, caught in a transformation that will define his future. Every interaction, every fight, and every moment on the ship pushes him closer to becoming something greater. As the ocean stretches endlessly around them, the fighters move closer to the unknown world of Gangkeng, where only one truth exists: survival of the fittest. The journey across the ocean continues, but now the atmosphere on the ship has completely changed. What once felt like a mysterious training voyage has slowly transformed into a pressure-filled battlefield. Christopher Dubois finds himself surrounded by elite fighters from different parts of the world, each one carrying their own pride, discipline, and hidden aggression. The calm surface of the ship hides an intense psychological war that is already unfolding beneath it. Christopher is still adjusting to this new reality. He is no longer a street survivor in New York, but he is also not fully transformed into a disciplined martial artist. He exists in a strange middle state, caught between instinct and training. This makes him unpredictable, even to those observing him closely. Some fighters see him as weak due to his lack of formal discipline, while others sense something dangerous in his raw, unrefined fighting ability. On the ship, silence is rare. Even when people are not speaking, there is constant observation. Fighters watch each other during meals, during training, and even during rest. Every movement is analyzed. A simple handshake, a walking posture, or even eye contact becomes a clue about someone's strength or weakness. Christopher slowly begins to realize that survival here is not just about physical ability, but about awareness and mental control. The tension escalates when the first real confrontations begin to emerge. It does not start as an official fight, but rather small provocations between fighters. One fighter intentionally bumps into another. A training session becomes overly aggressive. A simple sparring match turns into a near-real fight. These moments reveal that everyone is trying to establish dominance without officially breaking the rules of the journey. Christopher gets pulled into this tension as well. One of the fighters begins to mock his street background, questioning whether he even belongs among elite warriors. The insult triggers Christopher's instincts, and for a moment he almost responds with raw aggression. But something inside him stops. He remembers the discipline he has been slowly learning under Lord Edgar Dobbs. This internal struggle between impulse and control becomes one of his biggest challenges. Meanwhile, other fighters begin forming small alliances. Some group together based on mutual respect, while others align themselves strategically, knowing that numbers can offer psychological advantage in future battles. However, not everyone is interested in alliances. Some fighters remain completely isolated, confident that they do not need anyone else to survive the upcoming tournament known as Ganggeng. Christopher observes all of this carefully. He understands that this ship is not just transporting fighters, it is revealing them. Every day, personalities are being exposed under pressure. The strongest fighters are not always the loudest or most aggressive. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous because they reveal nothing. Lord Edgar Dobbs continues to monitor everything from a distance. His role remains mysterious. He does not interfere directly in conflicts, but his presence alone adds weight to the journey. Christopher still does not fully understand Dobbs' intentions. Is he a mentor, a guide, or someone using Christopher for a larger purpose? This question continues to grow in Christopher's mind, especially as the journey becomes more intense. One evening, a controlled sparring session is organized among selected fighters. It is not an official tournament fight, but it is meant to test reactions, skill levels, and mental endurance. Christopher is selected to participate. This moment becomes a turning point because it is his first real opportunity to demonstrate how far he has come since leaving the streets. His opponent is a trained fighter with strict discipline and clean technique. From the beginning, it is clear that this is not a fair comparison in terms of style. The opponent relies on structured martial arts, precise movements, and calculated attacks. Christopher, on the other hand, fights with instinct, unpredictability, and adaptability. The fight begins cautiously, with both fighters testing each other. Christopher quickly realizes that pure aggression will not work here. He starts observing patterns, learning timing, and adjusting his movements. For the first time, he is not just reacting, he is thinking while fighting. This marks a significant shift in his development. As the sparring intensifies, Christopher's raw instincts begin to merge with the discipline he has been learning. He starts using a hybrid style, mixing street survival techniques with structured defense. This surprises his opponent, who expected him to be inexperienced and easy to control. Instead, Christopher becomes unpredictable, shifting rhythm and breaking expectations. The fight does not end in a clear victory or defeat, but it sends a strong message to everyone watching. Christopher is not an ordinary participant. He is evolving into something unique, a fighter who cannot be categorized easily. Some observers begin to take him more seriously, while others become cautious of his potential. After the sparring session, Christopher reflects on what happened. For the first time, he feels a small sense of control over his transformation. He is still far from being complete, but he is no longer the same boy who boarded the ship. The journey is slowly reshaping him into a warrior capable of surviving the unknown challenges of gang. However, the tension on the ship is far from over. The sparring match only deepens rivalries and increases silent competition among fighters. Everyone now understands that Christopher is not to be underestimated. At the same time, Christopher also understands something important. This is only the beginning. The real tournament, the real danger, and the real battles are still ahead. As the ship moves deeper into the ocean, the fighters move closer to their destination, where only the strongest, smartest, and most adaptable will survive. The ocean voyage has now entered a completely different phase. The ship, which once felt like a mysterious transport carrying selected fighters, has slowly transformed into a floating pressure chamber where every second tests patience, ego, and survival instinct. Christopher Dubois is no longer the same confused street survivor who boarded this journey. He is changing, but that change is neither smooth nor complete. It is messy, painful, and full of internal conflict. After the earlier sparring encounter, Christopher's presence on the ship is no longer ignored. Fighters who once dismissed him now watch him carefully. Some are curious, some are suspicious, and a few are openly annoyed by his unpredictable style. He is not a polished martial artist like many others on board, but there is something unsettling about him. He does not follow patterns properly, and that makes him harder to read. In a place where everyone is trying to predict everyone else, unpredictability becomes its own kind of strength. The ship's atmosphere grows heavier every day. There is no official tournament yet, but mentally the war has already begun. Fighters begin to isolate themselves or form small groups based on convenience and mutual benefit. Conversations are minimal. Even eye contact feels like a challenge. Every person on board knows they are being evaluated, not by judges, but by each other. The real selection process is happening silently through observation, fear, and intimidation. Christopher starts noticing something important during this phase. The strongest fighters are not always the loudest or most aggressive. In fact, the truly dangerous ones are often calm, silent, and observant. They do not waste energy on unnecessary conflict. Instead, they watch, calculate, and wait. This realization slowly shifts Christopher's understanding of what it means to be strong. Strength is no longer just physical, it is mental control, patience, and timing. However, not everyone on the ship understands this balance. Some fighters begin to let their pride take over. Small disagreements start turning into heated arguments. Training sessions become more aggressive than necessary. One fighter intentionally pushes another too far during practice, testing limits under the excuse of training intensity. But everyone knows it is not just training anymore. It is ego being tested in public. This is where the tension begins to break its surface. A confrontation eventually escalates between two fighters during a routine practice session. What starts as controlled sparring quickly turns into a real fight when one of them refuses to stop after landing a hard strike. The atmosphere changes instantly. The surrounding fighters step back, not to stop it, but to observe. There is an unspoken understanding now. Every conflict is a lesson. Every fight reveals something about skill, emotion, and weakness. Christopher watches this carefully. His instincts immediately want to react, either to intervene or to challenge someone himself, but he forces himself to stay controlled. This is one of the hardest lessons he is learning. Not every situation requires action. Sometimes observation is more powerful than reaction. This internal struggle defines his growth more than any physical training ever could. The fight ends without clear resolution, but the damage is done. Respect shifts, fear increases, boundaries weaken. Everyone on board now understands that discipline is slowly breaking down under pressure. The ship is no longer just a training environment, it is becoming a psychological battlefield where emotional stability is just as important as fighting ability. Lord Edgar Dobbs remains distant and unreadable throughout all of this. He does not interfere, does not stop conflicts, and does not explain anything to Christopher. His silence becomes more frustrating for Christopher with each passing day. There is a growing question inside him. Why was he chosen? What is Dobbs really preparing him for? And more importantly, what happens after the tournament? These unanswered questions start affecting Christopher's mindset. He begins to observe Dobbs more closely, trying to understand his behavior. But Dobbs remains calm, always watching, always analyzing, never revealing emotion. This mystery adds another layer of tension to Christopher's journey. As days pass, Christopher also begins to understand the deeper structure of the ship's environment. It is not just about training fighters, it is about revealing them. Pressure exposes truth. Weakness cannot stay hidden for long in such an environment. Every fighter is slowly being stripped of comfort, routine, and emotional stability. What remains is raw personality. Christopher starts adapting more consciously. He studies fighters instead of just reacting to them. He notices patterns: who gets angry quickly, who stays calm under pressure, who tries to intimidate others, and who avoids confrontation entirely. This analysis becomes part of his survival strategy. He is no longer just reacting like a street fighter, he is beginning to think like a strategist. At the same time, his internal conflict continues. The street version of Christopher still exists inside him. That version wants immediate action, direct response, and emotional expression. But the trained version he is becoming is learning control, patience, and calculation. These two sides constantly clash inside him, and every situation on the ship pushes one side closer to dominance. The ocean around them feels endless, almost symbolic. There is no land in sight, no escape, and no interruption. It is just the ship and the fighters moving toward an unknown destination called Gang. But by now it is clear that the real transformation is not waiting at the destination, it is happening during the journey itself. By the end of this phase, Christopher reaches an important realization. The tournament is not just about fighting others, it is about surviving yourself, your fear, your ego, your impulses, and your uncertainty. The ship has become a place where fighters are not only being transported, but slowly reshaped into something entirely different. And Christopher is right in the middle of that transformation. The journey across the ocean has now reached a point where calmness is completely gone. The ship is no longer just a transport or training space. It has become a floating arena of silent war. Every fighter on board understands one truth now. Gangang is not the only place where survival will be tested. The real testing is happening right here in the middle of the ocean, where there is no escape and no outside interference. Christopher Dubois continues to evolve, but the transformation is far from stable. He is learning faster than before, adapting to the environment, and slowly understanding that strength is not just physical power, it is emotional control under pressure. Still, inside him, two versions of himself constantly collide. One is the street survivor who reacts instantly, and the other is the trained fighter who thinks before moving. Every situation on the ship forces one of these sides to take control. The fighters on board are becoming more aggressive with each passing day. What started as observation and silent judgment has now turned into direct psychological intimidation. Fighters try to dominate space without officially breaking rules. Walking too close to someone, staring too long, or interrupting someone's training session becomes a silent challenge. Everyone is trying to establish mental superiority before the real tournament even begins. Christopher notices that fear is spreading in different forms. Some fighters hide it behind arrogance, others behind silence, and some try to compensate by becoming overly aggressive. But no one is truly untouched by it. The uncertainty of what lies ahead at Gangang is slowly affecting everyone's mindset. The ship is no longer just carrying fighters, it is carrying pressure, paranoia, and rising instability. One of the strongest shifts happens when a series of confrontations begins to escalate beyond normal sparring. A training session turns into a heated exchange when one fighter refuses to accept a clean defeat. Pride takes over, and what was supposed to be controlled practice turns into a real fight. The moment punches start landing with real intent, the atmosphere changes completely. Fighters around them do not immediately stop it. Instead, they form a circle and watch. Christopher observes this moment carefully. There is something different about this fight. It is not about technique anymore, it is about dominance. The fighters are no longer holding back. Every strike carries frustration, ego, and desperation. This is not just a physical battle, it is an emotional breakdown happening in real time. As the fight intensifies, one fighter gains upper hand through raw aggression, while the other struggles to maintain control. It becomes clear that skill alone is not enough in such situations. Mental stability under pressure decides everything. Eventually, the confrontation ends, but not with respect. Only silence and tension remain. No one claps, no one celebrates. Everyone simply absorbs what they have witnessed. Christopher feels something shift inside him after watching this. He realizes that the ship is slowly revealing the truth about every fighter. Under enough pressure, every mask falls. Discipline, confidence, arrogance, all of it eventually breaks down into pure instinct, and in that state only one thing matters: how well you can control yourself when everything around you is falling apart. At the same time, his curiosity about Lord Edgar Dobbs grows deeper. Dobbs remains distant, calm, and almost untouched by the chaos spreading across the ship. He watches everything but never interferes. Christopher begins to question whether Dobbs is truly a mentor or something else entirely. His silence is becoming more unsettling than any threat on board. Christopher tries to understand Dobbs by observing him closely, but there is nothing obvious to read. He speaks little, reacts less, and always maintains emotional control. This only deepens the mystery. Why would someone like Dobbs invest so much in a street orphan and bring him into this dangerous world? The question remains unanswered, but it keeps growing stronger in Christopher's mind. As the tension increases, alliances on board begin to shift again. Fighters who previously avoided each other start forming temporary understanding, while others become completely isolated. Trust is almost non-existent now. Even those who speak to each other do so with caution, as if every word might later be used as a weapon in the tournament. Christopher, however, remains in a unique position. He is not fully trusted by others, but he is also not fully rejected. His unpredictability keeps people uncertain about him. Some see him as a weak link, while others believe he might become a dark horse in Gangeng. This mixed perception gives him both risk and advantage at the same time. One evening, tension reaches another peak when a confrontation nearly turns into a full-scale brawl. A disagreement during training escalates rapidly, and within moments, multiple fighters are involved emotionally, even if not physically. The situation is intense enough that it feels like a single spark could ignite chaos across the entire ship. Christopher once again finds himself in the middle of this emotional storm. His instincts tell him to act, but his growing discipline forces him to pause. This moment defines his growth more than anything else so far. He is learning that reacting without thinking can create more damage than the conflict itself. Control is becoming his most important weapon. Slowly, the situation de-escalates, but the impact remains. Everyone on board now understands how fragile the balance is. One wrong move, one uncontrolled emotion, and everything could collapse into uncontrollable violence. The ship is no longer just a journey, it is a test of emotional endurance. As the night settles, Christopher stands alone for a moment, looking at the endless ocean surrounding them. There is no land, no direction visible, only uncertainty. He realizes that this journey is not just taking him to a tournament, it is reshaping who he is. Every moment, every conflict, every observation is building something new inside him. He is no longer just Christopher Dubois from the streets, but he is also not yet the warrior he is meant to become. He is stuck in transformation, and that transformation is the real story unfolding on this ship. The ocean continues to move, and so does his destiny, quietly, steadily, towards something unknown called Gangeng. The ship is now deep into the ocean, far away from any land, and the atmosphere on board has become almost unbearable. What once felt like an organized journey for elite fighters has now turned into a controlled chaos of ego, fear, and hidden violence. Every fighter knows that the real test is no longer only waiting at Gangeng. It is happening here every single day in small moments that slowly build into something more dangerous. Christopher Dubois continues to grow stronger, but his growth is not clean or stable. It is uneven, shaped by constant pressure and emotional conflict. He is learning to control himself, but control is not something he has fully mastered yet. Sometimes he reacts too quickly, sometimes he holds back too long. This uncertainty inside him reflects the unstable environment around him. The ship is changing him, but it is also challenging him at every step. The fighters on board are now completely aware that the environment is no longer safe or predictable. Even though official rules still exist, they are being tested constantly. Small confrontations have started to feel more serious. What used to be harmless sparring now carries hidden aggression. Every training session feels like it could turn into something irreversible if someone crosses the line. Christopher begins noticing a pattern. Fighters are no longer just trying to improve, they are trying to dominate mentally. Instead of openly attacking each other, they are creating pressure through intimidation. Long stares during training, refusing to acknowledge victories, and deliberately testing limits in sparring sessions have become common. The psychological warfare has intensified, and everyone is part of it whether they want to be or not. One particular training session becomes a turning point in the ship's atmosphere. A sparring match between two fighters starts under controlled conditions but quickly escalates beyond control. At first, it appears to be a normal test of skill. However, as the intensity increases, one fighter refuses to stop even after landing several heavy strikes. The energy shifts immediately. What was supposed to be practice turns into a real fight filled with aggression and frustration. The surrounding fighters do not immediately intervene. Instead, they step back and watch closely. There is an unspoken understanding now. Every conflict reveals something valuable. Strength, weakness, emotion, and fear all become visible in moments like this. The ship has turned into a place where violence is not just conflict but information. Christopher watches carefully as the fight intensifies. The strikes become less about technique and more about survival instinct. One fighter begins to lose control of his emotions, attacking wildly, while the other remains more focused, using timing and precision. The contrast between emotional chaos and controlled aggression becomes very clear. It is no longer just about who is stronger, it is about who can stay mentally stable under pressure. As the fight reaches its peak, one fighter gains clear advantage and delivers a decisive sequence of strikes that leaves the opponent seriously hurt. The moment is silent after it ends. No celebration, no cheering, only heavy silence. The injured fighter is taken away and everyone on board is reminded that this is not just training anymore. Even practice can have real consequences now. This incident deeply affects Christopher. For the first time he sees how quickly control can disappear. A moment of ego or anger can completely change everything. He begins to understand that in Gongeng, the real danger may not just be opponents, it may be losing control of oneself at the wrong moment. At the same time, his internal conflict becomes stronger. The street fighter inside him still reacts emotionally to violence, but the disciplined version of him tries to stay calm and analytical. Every time a situation escalates, both sides of him fight for dominance. This constant internal struggle is shaping his identity more than anything else on the ship. Lord Edgar Dobbs remains distant through all of this. His silence continues to create mystery and tension. He watches everything carefully but never reacts emotionally. Christopher still cannot understand his purpose. Dobbs does not behave like a typical mentor or trainer. He feels more like someone observing a larger experiment. This thought makes Christopher uneasy, but he has no proof of anything, only suspicion. As days pass, the ship becomes even more unstable emotionally. Fighters are now constantly evaluating each other, not just in training, but in daily life. Even walking past someone feels like a silent challenge. Trust has almost completely disappeared. Everyone is waiting for the next conflict, the next test, the next moment where someone breaks. Christopher adapts further during this phase. He becomes more observant and less reactive. Instead of responding emotionally, he starts analyzing situations before reacting. He studies body language, timing, and emotional triggers of other fighters. This makes him more dangerous in a different way. He is no longer just fighting with instinct, he is starting to fight with awareness. However, this awareness does not remove the danger. In fact, it increases pressure on him because he now understands more about what is at stake. Every decision matters. Every reaction can change how others perceive him. In a place like this, perception is power. The ocean around them remains endless and silent, reinforcing the feeling that there is no escape. The ship is a closed world where everything is amplified: fear, aggression, ambition, and uncertainty. As they move closer to Gangang, the tension becomes almost unbearable. By the end of this phase, Christopher understands a deeper truth. The ship is not just preparing fighters for a tournament, it is revealing who they truly are. And what it is revealing is not always strength. Sometimes it is fear, sometimes arrogance, and sometimes fragility hidden behind confidence. And Christopher himself is no exception. He is changing, but he is still unfinished. The real test is still ahead, but the journey is already shaping him into something far more complex than the boy who started on the streets. The destination is near, but the transformation is already unstoppable. The journey across the ocean has now entered its darkest and most unstable phase. The ship is no longer just a moving training ground. It has become a pressure cooker where emotions, pride, and survival instincts are constantly clashing. Every fighter on board knows that Gang is approaching, but the more immediate danger now feels like each other. Christopher Dubois stands at the center of this growing tension. He is no longer the confused street survivor from the beginning of the journey, but he is also not yet a fully refined martial artist. His transformation is ongoing, and this in-between state makes him unpredictable. Some fighters see him as improving rapidly, while others still underestimate him, believing his raw style will fail under real pressure. But Christopher is changing in ways that are not immediately visible. He is learning to read people more carefully, to observe before reacting, and to control the emotional impulses that once defined him. Still, this control is fragile. One strong trigger is enough to pull him back into instinct, and everyone on board is slowly discovering that about him. The ship's atmosphere has now become extremely tense. Fighters no longer interact casually. Even basic movement through corridors feels like passing through invisible boundaries of dominance. A simple look can feel like a challenge. A short silence can feel like disrespect. Every interaction carries weight, and every moment is loaded with unspoken tension. This psychological pressure finally begins to break into more dangerous territory. Small confrontations that once stopped at verbal exchanges now escalate further. Fighters are no longer satisfied with silent intimidation. They want confirmation of superiority. And in an environment where rules still exist but enforcement is weak, conflict becomes inevitable. A major turning point begins when a disagreement during training escalates far beyond control. What starts as a controlled sparring session quickly shifts into a serious confrontation. One fighter, driven by ego and frustration, refuses to accept the outcome of a clean exchange. Instead of stepping back, he pushes forward aggressively, turning the training into a real fight. The shift is immediate and noticeable. The energy in the room changes from structured discipline to raw chaos. Fighters watching from the sidelines do not rush to stop it. Instead, they form a circle, silently observing. This has become the new normal on board. The line between training and real combat is disappearing. Christopher watches closely, fully aware that this is no longer just about technique. The fighters are now driven by emotion, pride, and the need to assert dominance before reaching gang. Every punch thrown carries frustration built up over days of silent tension. Every movement reflects deeper psychological instability. As the fight intensifies, one fighter begins to lose control. His attacks become less structured, more desperate. The other fighter takes advantage of this instability, staying calmer and more precise. The contrast becomes clear: emotional aggression versus controlled discipline. And in this environment, control begins to prove more powerful than raw anger. The fight ends brutally, with one fighter left badly injured. The silence afterward is heavier than the fight itself. No one celebrates, no one speaks. The injured fighter is taken away and the reality settles in once again. This is no longer preparation. This is already survival in its earliest form. Christopher is deeply affected by what he sees. It reinforces a growing realization inside him. In a place like this, losing control is more dangerous than losing a fight. One moment of emotional weakness can completely change a person's fate. This lesson begins to sink deeper into his mindset. At the same time, his internal struggle becomes more intense. The street-born instinct inside him reacts strongly to violence and confrontation, pushing him toward action. But the disciplined side of him, shaped by training and observation, forces him to pause and think. These two versions of himself are constantly in conflict, especially in moments like this. Lord Edgar Dobbs continues to remain distant and unreadable throughout all of this. His silence is almost unsettling now. He watches everything but never interferes. Christopher cannot understand whether Dobbs is a mentor guiding him or simply an observer watching a controlled experiment unfold. The lack of answers begins to weigh heavily on him, but there is no opportunity to confront it. As tensions continue to rise, trust on board completely collapses. Fighters no longer rely on words or promises. Every interaction is strategic. Even silence becomes suspicious. The ship has become a closed system where everyone is both observer and potential threat. Christopher adapts further during this phase. His awareness sharpens. He begins to recognize subtle signs of aggression before it becomes visible. Body posture, breathing changes, and eye movement all become indicators for him. He is no longer just reacting to fights, he is anticipating them. But this heightened awareness also increases pressure on him. The more he understands, the more dangerous everything feels. Every fighter now appears more complex, more unpredictable. The margin for error is shrinking as they get closer to Gang. One night, the tension on the ship reaches another critical level. A confrontation nearly erupts into a full-scale violent outbreak when misunderstandings and ego collide during a training session. For a brief moment, it feels like the entire ship could descend into chaos. Fighters are ready, emotions are high, and control is dangerously close to breaking. Christopher once again finds himself in the middle of this unstable situation. His instinct pushes him toward involvement, but his growing discipline forces restraint. He holds himself back, choosing observation over reaction. This decision marks another step in his evolution. He is learning that survival is not always about acting. It is about knowing when not to act. Eventually, the situation de-escalates, but the damage to trust is irreversible. Everyone on board now understands how fragile the balance has become. One mistake could trigger something far worse than anything they have experienced so far. As the night settles, Christopher stands alone, looking out at the endless ocean. There is no land in sight, no escape, no interruption, only movement toward an unknown destination. The silence of the ocean contrasts sharply with the chaos inside the ship. In that moment he realizes something important. The real fight is not waiting at Gangang. It is already happening within every fighter on board, including himself. Control, identity, fear, and ambition are all colliding, shaping who they will become before they even reach the tournament. And Christopher understands clearly now. By the time they arrive, none of them will be the same person who started this journey. Everyone knows that Gangang is close, but no one truly knows what awaits them there. This uncertainty creates a strange silence that spreads through the ship like a fog. Christopher Dubois stands in the middle of this final phase of transformation. He is no longer the impulsive street survivor, and he is not just a developing fighter anymore. He is becoming something more balanced, but also more dangerous in a controlled way. His instincts are still strong, but now they are guided by awareness. He no longer reacts blindly. He thinks, observes, and then acts. The fighters on board have also changed. The aggressive energy that once dominated the ship has now shifted into focused silence. Conversations have reduced even further. Training is no longer about proving dominance, it is about preparation and self-control. Every fighter seems to have entered a personal mental space, preparing themselves internally for what is coming next. Christopher notices this shift clearly. The chaos of earlier days has settled into something more concentrated. There are no more unnecessary confrontations, but the tension has not disappeared. It has transformed. Instead of outward aggression, there is now internal pressure. Every fighter is holding themselves together, trying not to break under the weight of expectation. Lord Edgar Dobbs remains as mysterious as ever. His presence is calm, almost detached from everything happening around him. Christopher still cannot fully understand his role. He does not guide openly, does not explain, and does not interfere. Yet his influence is undeniable. Everything that has happened to Christopher seems to be leading toward this final moment, but the reason remains hidden. As the ship moves closer to its destination, the environment itself begins to feel different. The ocean becomes quieter, the air heavier, and even the light seems different during the day. It feels as if the world outside is also preparing for what is about to happen. The fighters sense it too, though no one speaks about it directly. Christopher spends more time in observation now. He studies every fighter carefully, not to challenge them but to understand them. He recognizes that each of them carries a different kind of strength. Some rely on discipline, some on speed, some on aggression, and others on patience. But beyond fighting style, he starts seeing emotional patterns. Fear hidden behind confidence, doubt hidden behind silence, and pride covering insecurity. This awareness changes how Christopher sees himself as well. He realizes that he is not defined by one identity anymore. He is not just a street fighter or a trained martial artist. He is a combination of both. This hybrid identity gives him an edge but also makes him harder to categorize. Even he is still trying to understand who he is becoming. One of the most important changes during this phase is the absence of conflict. There are almost no fights anymore. The earlier aggressive energy has been replaced by mental preparation. Fighters are conserving energy, avoiding unnecessary risk, and focusing inward. It feels like the calm before a storm, an extremely controlled silence that is more intense than any previous violence. Christopher feels this calm differently than others. Instead of relaxing him, it increases his awareness. He knows that silence in such a place is never natural. It always comes before something significant. Every fighter is waiting, and waiting itself becomes a form of pressure. During this time, Christopher also reflects more deeply on everything that has happened so far. The journey from the streets of New York to this moment feels almost unreal. Every phase has reshaped him in some way. Street survival, structured training, psychological pressure, and constant observation. Each stage has removed something from his old identity and replaced it with something new. But the final question still remains unanswered in his mind. What is Gang really going to be? Lord Edgar Dobbs' silence becomes even more meaningful now. Christopher begins to suspect that Dobbs has known the full purpose of this journey from the beginning. But without answers, everything remains speculation. This uncertainty adds emotional weight to the final stage of the voyage. As the ship continues forward, a subtle shift begins in the environment. The water becomes less predictable, the horizon starts to feel closer, and the sense of direction becomes more defined. Fighters begin to sense that arrival is near. Even without announcements, everyone can feel that the journey is approaching its conclusion. This realization creates a final wave of internal pressure among the fighters. Some become more focused, others more silent, and a few begin to show signs of emotional strain. But no one breaks completely. Everyone is holding themselves together, trying to remain composed until the moment of arrival. Christopher, meanwhile, reaches a deeper level of clarity. He understands now that survival will not depend only on fighting ability, but on complete control over mind and emotion. Every lesson he has learned so far is converging into one point: discipline, awareness, patience, and adaptability. As the ship moves forward into unknown waters, Christopher stands alone for a moment, looking at the horizon. The ocean is calm, but the meaning behind that calmness is clear. Something important is about to begin, and everything he has experienced so far has been preparation for it. The ocean journey finally reaches its most anticipated moment. After days of silence, tension, and psychological pressure on board the ship, the horizon begins to change. The endless blue water starts to feel different, less like travel and more like arrival. Every fighter on board senses it instinctively. Gang is near. Christopher Dubois stands among the fighters in complete silence. No one speaks much now. Even the usual rivalry energy has settled into focused anticipation. The chaos that once filled the ship has transformed into controlled stillness. It is not peace, it is preparation. Everyone is mentally bracing themselves for what comes next. As the ship moves closer, a mysterious landmass begins to appear through the mist. It is not a modern, clearly defined location. Instead, it feels hidden, almost forgotten by the outside world. The atmosphere changes instantly. Fighters who were once aggressive and loud are now quiet, scanning the shoreline with a mix of curiosity and caution. The ship finally reaches its destination, and a strange sense of awe spreads among the fighters. This is not a normal arrival point. Everything about the place feels secretive and symbolic, as if it exists outside the regular world. There are no crowds, no modern infrastructure, only an ancient, almost ceremonial environment that immediately signals something far beyond a simple tournament. Christopher steps off the ship with the other fighters, and the ground beneath him feels different from anything he has experienced before. The air itself carries a sense of history and mystery. This is Gangang, the legendary hidden martial arts tournament that only a select few in the world ever get to see. As they are guided further inside, the scale of what lies ahead slowly begins to reveal itself. Massive structures, ancient designs, and a gathering space prepared for combat suggest that this is not just a competition. It is a global convergence of elite fighters from every corner of the world. Each one has been chosen, tested, and brought here for a single purpose: to fight until only one remains standing. Christopher observes everything carefully. Unlike others who react with visible emotion, he stays controlled. His training and experiences on the ship have taught him not to rush into emotional responses. Instead, he absorbs details. He studies the environment, the guards, the structure, and even the behavior of other fighters. This habit of observation has become one of his strongest tools. As the fighters are escorted deeper into the location, they begin to see the true scale of Gangang. It is not just a battlefield, it is a fully organized system of competition. Every element feels deliberate, nothing is random. Even the silence in the environment feels intentional, as if the place itself demands respect and discipline. The fighters begin to understand that this is not a normal tournament where rules are explained openly. Instead, it is a controlled but mysterious system where survival depends not just on strength, but on understanding the environment quickly. The unknown rules create a psychological pressure that is almost as intense as physical danger. Christopher also notices something else. This place feels different from anything discussed during the journey. Whatever expectations he had before arriving are now incomplete. The reality of Gangang is larger, more structured, and far more serious than he imagined. This realization reinforces a truth he has been learning throughout the journey: assumptions can be dangerous. Among the fighters, reactions vary. Some look confident, as if they have been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Others look cautious, analyzing everything around them. A few seem overwhelmed by the scale and mystery of the place, but no one shows weakness openly. Everyone is trying to maintain composure. Lord Edgar Dobbs remains present but still distant in behavior. His expression does not change much, and he continues to observe without revealing emotion. Christopher still cannot fully understand his role in all of this. Dobbs seems connected to the structure of this world, yet detached from the emotional experience of it. This contrast deepens Christopher's curiosity and uncertainty about him. As the group is guided further inside, they reach the central area where fighters from different regions are beginning to gather. This is where the true identity of Gangang starts to become visible. It is not just a physical arena, it is a global convergence point where different fighting philosophies, traditions, and strategies meet. Becomes a clue about someone's strength or weakness. Christopher slowly begins to realize that survival here is not just about physical ability, but about awareness and mental control. The tension escalates when the first real confrontations begin to emerge. It does not start as an official fight, but rather small provocations between fighters. One fighter intentionally bumps into another. A training session becomes overly aggressive. A simple sparring match turns into a near real fight. These moments reveal that everyone is trying to establish dominance without officially breaking the rules of the journey. Christopher gets pulled into this tension as well. One of the fighters begins to mock his street background, questioning whether he even belongs among elite warriors. The insult triggers Christopher's instincts, and for a moment he almost responds with raw aggression. But something inside him stops. He remembers the discipline he has been slowly learning under Lord Edgar Dobbs. This internal struggle between impulse and control becomes one of his biggest challenges. Meanwhile, other fighters begin forming small alliances. Some group together based on mutual respect, while others align themselves strategically, knowing that numbers can offer psychological advantage in future battles. However, not everyone is interested in alliances. Some fighters remain completely isolated, confident that they do not need anyone else to survive the upcoming tournament known as Gang. Christopher observes all of this carefully. He understands that this ship is not just transporting fighters, it is revealing them. Every day, personalities are being exposed under pressure. The strongest fighters are not always the loudest or most aggressive. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous because they reveal nothing. Lord Edgar Dobbs continues to monitor everything from a distance. His role remains mysterious. He does not interfere directly in conflicts, but his presence alone adds weight to the journey. Christopher still does not fully understand Dobbs' intentions. Is he a mentor, a guide, or someone using Christopher for a larger purpose? This question continues to grow in Christopher's mind, especially as the journey becomes more intense. One evening, a controlled sparring session is organized among selected fighters. It is not an official tournament fight, but it is meant to test reactions, skill levels, and mental endurance. Christopher is selected to participate. This moment becomes a turning point because it is his first real opportunity to demonstrate how far he has come since leaving the streets. His opponent is a trained fighter with strict discipline and clean technique. From the beginning, it is clear that this is not a fair comparison in terms of style. The opponent relies on structured martial arts, precise movements, and calculated attacks. Christopher, on the other hand, fights with instinct, unpredictability, and adaptability. The fight begins cautiously, with both fighters testing each other. Christopher quickly realizes that pure aggression will not work here. He starts observing patterns, learning timing, and adjusting his movements. For the first time, he is not just reacting, he is thinking while fighting. This marks a significant shift in his development. As the sparring intensifies, Christopher's raw instincts begin to merge with the discipline he has been learning. He starts using a hybrid style, mixing street survival techniques with structured defense. This surprises his opponent, who expected him to be inexperienced and easy to control. Instead, Christopher becomes unpredictable, shifting rhythm and breaking expectations. The fight does not end in a clear victory or defeat, but it sends a strong message. Speaks. The injured fighter is taken away and the reality settles in once again. This is no longer preparation. This is already survival in its earliest form. Christopher is deeply affected by what he sees. It reinforces a growing realization inside him. In a place like this, losing control is more dangerous than losing a fight. One moment of emotional weakness can completely change a person's fate. This lesson begins to sink deeper into his mindset. At the same time, his internal struggle becomes more intense. The street-born instinct inside him reacts strongly to violence and confrontation, pushing him toward action. But the disciplined side of him, shaped by training and observation, forces him to pause and think. These two versions of himself are constantly in conflict, especially in moments like this. Lord Edgar Dobbs continues to remain distant and unreadable throughout all of this. His silence is almost unsettling now. He watches everything but never interferes. Christopher cannot understand whether Dobbs is a mentor guiding him or simply an observer watching a controlled experiment unfold. The lack of answers begins to weigh heavily on him, but there is no opportunity to confront it. As tensions continue to rise, trust on board completely collapses. Fighters no longer rely on words or promises. Every interaction is strategic. Even silence becomes suspicious. The ship has become a closed system where everyone is both observer and potential threat. Christopher adapts further during this phase. His awareness sharpens. He begins to recognize subtle signs of aggression before it becomes visible. Body posture, breathing changes, and eye movement all become indicators for him. He is no longer just reacting to fights, he is anticipating them. But this heightened awareness also increases pressure on him. The more he understands, the more dangerous everything feels. Every fighter now appears more complex, more unpredictable. The margin for error is shrinking as they get closer to Gang Gang. One night, the tension on the ship reaches another critical level. A confrontation nearly erupts into a full-scale violent outbreak when misunderstandings and ego collide during a training session. For a brief moment, it feels like the entire ship could descend into chaos. Fighters are ready, emotions are high, and control is dangerously close to breaking. Christopher once again finds himself in the middle of this unstable situation. His instinct pushes him toward involvement, but his growing discipline forces restraint. He holds himself back, choosing observation over reaction. This decision marks another step in his evolution. He is learning that survival is not always about acting. It is about knowing when not to act. Eventually, the situation de-escalates, but the damage to trust is irreversible. Everyone on board now understands how fragile the balance has become. One mistake could trigger something far worse than anything they have experienced so far. As the night settles, Christopher stands alone, looking out at the endless ocean. There is no land in sight, no escape, no interruption, only movement toward an unknown destination. The silence of the ocean contrasts sharply with the chaos inside the ship. In that moment he realizes something important. The real fight is not waiting at Gangen. It is already happening within every fighter on board. Christopher looks around and realizes something important. Every fighter here has been shaped by a different world, a different environment, and a different reason for fighting. Some fight for honor, some for survival, some for power, and others for personal redemption. But despite their differences, they are all bound by the same destination. The atmosphere grows heavier as the fighters are positioned and organized. There is still no clear explanation of how the tournament will proceed, but the structure itself suggests that only the strongest, smartest, and most adaptable will move forward. Christopher feels a final internal shift as he stands among them. The journey that began on the streets, passed through training, and survived the chaos of the ship has now brought him here. But he understands one thing clearly. Arrival does not mean completion, it means the beginning of a new and more dangerous phase. The ocean journey is over, but Gangang has just begun to reveal itself. Gangang is no longer a mystery now, it is a reality. The hidden world that once felt like a legend is now fully visible, and Christopher Dubois stands inside it as one of the selected fighters. The silence of the ocean has been replaced by the heavy energy of the arena, where every breath feels like preparation for war. This is the final stage of everything he has gone through. The fighters are brought into a structured tournament environment where the true nature of Gangeng begins to reveal itself. This is not a simple knockout competition. It is a survival-based martial arts system where every match tests not just physical ability, but mental strength, adaptability, and emotional control. The atmosphere is intense. Crowds, officials, and elite observers watch carefully as fighters prepare for combat. Christopher takes in everything slowly. After everything he has experienced, the streets, the training, the ship, and the psychological pressure, he understands that this moment is not about excitement, it is about control. Every fighter here is dangerous in their own way, and mistakes will not be forgiven. The tournament officially begins, and the first rounds of combat are announced. Fighters are matched, and the arena becomes a place where different styles clash: strength against speed, discipline against instinct, experience against unpredictability. Each fight is a short story of survival, where only one person walks away with advantage. Christopher's turn eventually arrives. Standing in the arena, he feels the weight of everything he has been through. The noise of the crowd fades in his mind. He is no longer thinking about fear or pressure. Instead, he enters a focused state where everything becomes clear and sharp. This is the result of everything he learned on board the ship: observation, patience, and control. His opponent steps forward, a trained and experienced fighter with clear technical discipline. From the beginning, the contrast is obvious. The opponent relies on structure, precision, and calculated attacks. Christopher, however, relies on adaptability, instinct, and unpredictable movement shaped by both street survival and structured training. The fight begins cautiously. Both fighters test distance, timing, and reaction. Christopher does not rush. He observes patterns just like he learned during the journey. Every movement from his opponent becomes information. Instead of reacting emotionally, he analyzes before responding. As the fight intensifies, Christopher begins to blend his two worlds. The street fighter inside him gives him unpredictability and raw aggression, while the trained side gives him timing and control. This combination makes him difficult to read. His opponent starts struggling to predict his movements. The arena becomes silent in perception as focus increases. Every strike carries meaning, every movement is a decision. The fight is no longer just physical, it is mental chess played at high speed. Christopher starts gaining control not by overpowering, but by adapting faster than his opponent can adjust. A key moment arrives when Christopher successfully breaks his opponent's rhythm. Instead of following expected patterns, he changes timing and angles, forcing his opponent into hesitation. That hesitation becomes the opening he needs. He lands decisive strikes that shift the momentum completely in his favor. The fight ends with Christopher emerging victorious, but not with arrogance or celebration. Instead, he remains composed. He understands that winning one fight does not define the tournament. It only means survival for the next stage. This mindset reflects his complete transformation from a reactive street fighter to a controlled competitor. As the tournament continues, other matches unfold, each more intense than the last. Fighters are eliminated and the competition becomes more selective. The environment grows more serious as only the strongest advance. Every victory feels harder, every loss more final. Christopher continues progressing through the rounds, facing different opponents with unique fighting styles. Each match tests a different aspect of his ability: speed, defense, endurance, and mental stability. With every fight, he adapts further, becoming more efficient, more aware, and more controlled. Lord Edgar Dobbs continues to observe quietly. His presence remains distant, but now there is a clearer sense that everything has been leading toward this structured chaos. Christopher still does not fully understand Dobbs's intentions, but he no longer has the luxury of focusing on that mystery. The tournament demands full attention. As Christopher moves deeper into the competition, he reaches a point where physical exhaustion begins to matter less than mental endurance. The real challenge is no longer about strength alone, it is about survival under pressure, recovery between fights, and the ability to stay focused despite fatigue and uncertainty. In the final phase of the tournament journey, Christopher faces one last opponent before reaching the highest level of competition. This fight represents everything he has learned so far. Unlike earlier matches, this opponent is highly experienced, composed, and extremely strategic. The battle is intense, balanced, and mentally draining. Christopher uses everything he has learned, the discipline from training, the awareness from the ship, and the instinct from his past life. The fight becomes a perfect balance of strategy and survival. In a critical moment, Christopher manages to outthink his opponent, creating a small opening that decides the outcome. He wins again, but the victory feels different this time. It is not just physical success, it is confirmation of his transformation. He is no longer just a participant in Gang. He is now a real contender shaped by experience, pressure, and adaptation. As the tournament continues beyond this point, Christopher stands among the remaining fighters, fully aware that the journey is far from over. But something fundamental has changed inside him. He is no longer the boy who started on the streets, nor just a trainee on a ship. He has become a complete fighter shaped by every phase of his journey. The film closes on this evolving transformation. Christopher standing in the world of Gangeng, fully aware that every battle ahead will define not just the winner of the tournament, but the person he is becoming.